we can start. Hi everybody, welcome. My name is not Silvia Ferrara, my name is Pia Campezzani, but I'm here to represent both of us. Silvia unfortunately cannot join us right now. She will hopefully join us later, and I'm using her account because she's the organizer via Zoom of these seminars. So here we are, and we're very, very happy to welcome today's guest, who's Marianna Bolognesi. Marianna Bolognesi is soon to be associate professor at the University of Bologna. She has just won an ERC starting grant on the topic of abstraction, unlocking meaning from experience through language. And if I'm not wrong, the ERC is about to start, Marianna, so in 10 days time or so. And this makes this meeting even more exciting because it is a preview of what you're going to work on for the next 5 years. So very, very generally, I would like to introduce your research, which focuses on how abstract concepts are represented in the mind. What is the role of language in determining the content of these concepts, especially when these are abstract. And Marianna is also concerned and interested in metaphors, the way metaphors are conceived and the way metaphors are learned. From a methodological viewpoint, she uses computational methods, psychology, language processing, and learning together. So she will have much more to say about this. She's written extensively on these topics already. And so I'm very happy to leave the floor to her. I will just remind you all before Marianna starts that our next speaker is scheduled on the 3rd of June. It's Enza Spinapolice from Sapienza University in Rome, and she will talk about science and modern behavior, facts and fiction about early Homo sapiens and our closest relatives, the Neanderthals. So we'll see, hopefully we'll see you all there too. And well, Marianna, the floor is yours. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure. Let me share my screen. So the thing is, I'm not going to talk about my ERC project because my ERC project indeed is on abstraction. Full screen. But is on abstraction in language. And with Silvia, we agreed together that the topic of this talk is going to be on writing beyond words, so communication beyond language. So I'm gonna touch on the topic of my ERC project, but that's not going to be the topic of today's talk. Actually, today's talk addresses a few questions, six questions that I summarized here. So as you kindly mentioned, I have been working on figurative language and thought, and on metaphor in particular for the past decade, a few years at this point. And to be honest, my focus and most of the research on metaphor is from the point of view of the receiver of metaphor. So how we comprehend, how we make sense of metaphors, how we interpret metaphors. Not much research has been done on how, from the perspective of the producers, so metaphor production. And the topic that Silvia suggested actually stimulated me to think of, this other point of view of metaphor studies when we write metaphors, when we produce metaphors, and in particular when we produce metaphors beyond language, so using other systems of signs. So the 6 questions that I'm going to hopefully address in this talk are here. How do metaphors in images look like? In which genres are metaphorical images produced? How can metaphorical images be classified? What do words do within the metaphorical images that have also words? Yeah. And then how are abstract concepts expressed pictorially in metaphorical images? And finally, how do we write the content of abstract concepts using emoji? So here we go. First question first. How do metaphors in images look like? So there is a lot of research on metaphor, especially in the past 40 years. A lot of research has been embedded in the cognitive linguistic tradition, even though there is also a very strong tradition in metaphor studies addressed from media studies, semiotics, and related disciplines. So what we are used to when we think of metaphors, we are used to see metaphors, to think of metaphors expressed through words, metaphors in language. And here we have an example of, for instance, a literal statement: Sam did not digest the pizza. And this is an instance of a metaphorical statement, even though not particularly creative, is quite conventionalized probably. Sam did not digest the news. In this sentence, the verb digest is not used in its literal meaning. So we can't really digest news. It's used metaphorically. How are metaphorical images constructed? How do they look like? So first, well, metaphors in images, or at least the scientific literature, the scientific and systematic studies of metaphorical images, it should be mentioned that it follows by a decade, at least, the study of metaphors in language, in the sense that a lot of research in the past decades has been done on metaphors in language. I'm talking about the contemporary studies of metaphors. I'm not talking about Aristotle and so forth. But let's say, yeah, in the past 50 years or so, metaphors in language have drawn most of the attention of metaphor, people interested in metaphor. And then metaphors in images became also an increasingly popular topic. How do these metaphorical images look like? Well, if we can agree that this might be intended as a literal image where a person is verbally attacking, verbally abusing another person, unluckily is a man against a woman, the image on the right shows a metaphorical representation of a similar situation. So this image on the right can be labeled as metaphorical according to the literature, the scientific literature in metaphor studies. Why so? How metaphors in images are defined? They have been defined in different ways, but all the definitions seem to have a common aspect. So metaphors in images are usually intended to be violations of standard modes of depiction that are universally recognizable. This is an old definition. About the universality, there will be a lot to say about that, but we'll get there. Another definition, more recent, so metaphorical images are pictorial representations where a conventional reading does not exhaust the meaning potential or yield anomaly. So these and other definitions of metaphorical images suggest that there is, in these images, there are incongruities. So there are things that are unexpected, the violations of an unexpected visual scenario, yeah. And these unexpected things capture the viewer's attention and stimulate them to establish comparisons between distant entities that are either fully represented or partially represented, or somehow cued by the context. So there is this incongruity in this image, in these images that are usually labeled as metaphorical. And I'm wondering, and I would like also to have your opinions, is this incongruity sufficient to determine whether an image is metaphorical? I would like to draw your attention on these images here. So all of these images, which I took from Pinterest, they display some sort of incongruities, right? they show, like here there is a hairbrush that has a cactus. Also here there is a cactus instead of a tongue. There is a gun inside, a banana. So all of these, like a shoe that looks like chili pepper. So all of these images show some incongruity, something visually unexpected. Yeah. So can we say that all of these images are metaphorical? Let's see a few of them, another few examples of curious images, right, that show incongruities. Can we say that these images are metaphorical, that they are metaphors? Well, the thing is, you probably would agree with me that when we look at these images and we try to construct a metaphor, yeah, there is something missing. Like we miss some information. We miss context, right? We miss clues that may help us to understand what's the context, what's the communicative goal of the person who produced these images. So by looking, for instance, at this image, I can say that, yes, there is an umbrella, that there is a salad that looks like an umbrella, or an umbrella that looks like a salad. Even the directionality of this comparison is not clear, right? So, and I can see that the similarity is based on resemblance. It's based on the shape of the two objects, which is similar. But is it enough to make a metaphor? Like, can I get any further in my interpretation from this, you know, from this alignment between an umbrella and a salad? There aren't enough, probably, details. There aren't enough clues that may help me to construct a metaphor. And here we have other examples. So, but again, if we look at these images long enough, some of us, not necessarily all of us, but some of us may find an interpretation that constructs, let's say, a metaphor. So some of us may think that, a salad, an umbrella, oh, well, it could be that the salad stands for the more abstract category of vegetables in general, and the umbrella stands for the more abstract category of tools that protect us in general. And so we can climb the ladder of abstraction in a way and find a comparison between vegetables and things that protect us. And so one could construct a metaphor and say, yeah, it could be a social campaign to promote eating more vegetables, you know, because vegetables are good for us, they protect us, and so forth. So if we stay long enough on these images, even though there aren't many contextual clues that may help us to find a metaphor, to construct a metaphor, if we stay long enough, we might construct a metaphor. And why do we do so? Because when we see these incongruities, we seek meaning. So we try to make sense of something unexpected. And usually when we see an incongruity, so when we see something like these images, we try to construct a metaphorical comparison. We try to make sense by constructing a metaphorical comparison between two things that are displayed close to one another, because similarity in shape and closeness in visual closeness usually triggers the search for a deeper and more abstract, more conceptual similarity. To do so, yeah, we look around for contextual clues, which sometimes are missing. And so maybe the interpretations that we may give to these images are very much varied, differ very much among speakers. So images like those from Pinterest that I showed you, unless they evoke immediately a linguistic expression, because also this image here doesn't have much contextual information, but maybe it can be arguable that it triggers immediately the linguistic expression like verbal violence. Yeah. So images like the Pinterest images require time and much cognitive effort to be interpreted because they lack clues. So what do we do when we see these images? We start from acknowledging that there is a perceptual similarity, and then we possibly try to abstract and try to build a metaphor based on these images. So these can be called potential metaphors. So the incongruity is not probably enough. The incongruity alone is not enough to determine whether an image is metaphorical or not. Second question that we ask, in which genres are metaphorical images produced? So if we look at the literature on visual metaphors, pictorial metaphors, and so forth, these images or metaphors in images have been analyzed across a variety of textual genres. To name some, the most popular ones, advertising is one of the most popular genres. Here we have an example of Zampirone, which is a very Italian thing. I didn't know, but when I show this example in international context, people don't know what this is many times because they don't use Zampironi. I wouldn't even know how to call this product in English. It's Zampirone. So here is an advertisement that shows the power of this anti-mosquito device, which is compared to bombs. Social campaigns is another textual genre in which visual metaphors or pictorial metaphors are commonly analyzed. And here we have social campaigns about the climate crisis, the world is melting, about global warming, the world is melting as an ice cream. Political cartoons also often use metaphors, display metaphors. Here we have Europe represented as a sinking ship, and we have all the state members represented as stars, and they fight with one another. I don't know which one is Italy, it's probably that one up there. Art, it's another genre in which metaphors have been extensively analyzed, and we have different subgenres, let's say. Here we have an instance of painting, metaphorical painting by a Russian artist who lives in the States, in California, for the past decades. Also in street art, metaphors are commonly used. We have Obama compared to Superman. In photographs, they have been analyzed, metaphors have been analyzed, and so forth. Comics is another genre in which visual metaphors, pictorial metaphors have been analyzed. And here we are so used to seeing, for instance, anger represented through these clouds of steam coming out from the ears that maybe we wouldn't even recognize that it's a metaphorical, but that's not literal. Well, Donald Duck himself is not literal, but in particular, the idea of graphically displaying anger as a steam coming out from the ears, it's considered to be metaphorical. Stock images is another genre in which metaphors have been analyzed. Stock images are these generic images that can be used on websites, on presentations, and so forth. And this was retrieved using the keyword biodiversity. So I don't know whether you are familiar with this game, the Jenga Tower game. It's a game where you have to slowly pull out the bricks without, making the whole tower falling down. And metaphorically, this process is compared to what we as humans are doing with biodiversity. So we are probably slowly killing one species after the other. And hopefully the whole biosystem is not going to collapse, but that's unexpected outcome. Infographics is another genre in which metaphors are used. This is a very interesting graph. It has been analyzed by, let me find his name, by a PhD student who is now a postdoc in Birmingham. And he works with Bodo Winter in Birmingham. I will recollect his name. And he shows that in infographics, usually, and in graphs in general, usually metaphors, like we assume that the graphs are structured in such a way where like the highest points, it means more, right? And the lowest points of the graph means less. In this graph in particular, as you can see, the epsilon axis is upside down because the person who produced this graph wanted to convey this, this idea of blood, falling down, because it's a graph about the number of people dead by gunshots in Florida. And the idea is that, that there is a change in the distribution around the year in which it was introduced a new law, basically. The problem is that if we look at this graph, instinctively, we would think that these data points, it means that more people died by gunshot, and this data point means that less people died by gunshots. It's actually the opposite, because the person who made this graph, put the epsilon axis upside down to convey this idea of the blood. So the idea here is that metaphors can be used also in graphs, but if they clash against more conventionalized metaphors that we expect to find in graphs, if they clash against the way we are used to read graphs, then they might be not very effective. And in logos there is a lot of research, especially by Spanish colleagues, who work on the identification of metaphors in logos and how to create effective logos that combine different metaphorical elements. This is a very popular one. And actually there are different interpretations about the meaning of the Nike logo, the dynamicity or the wing of the goddess Nike and so forth. So these are different genres in which metaphors, pictorial metaphors, can be analyzed. And how can they be classified? How can metaphorical images be classified? Well, early studies rooted in semiotics mainly propose, for instance, for Seville's model of pictorial metaphors in advertising particularly, proposes that people who write metaphors, who produce metaphors in advertising, they tend to use these three different techniques. They can, in some cases, they align, so they fully display, they fully represent both the metaphor terms, where one of the metaphor terms is usually the product that they want to advertise, the product that they want to sell. In this case, is a car. So the car is compared to stingray. Is that the name of this fish? And both metaphor terms are fully represented. So this is the easiest type of metaphor that can be produced. It's easier for the receiver, is easier to interpret because both metaphor terms are fully represented. Another way to convey a metaphorical comparison between a product to be sold and something else, it's by constructing a hybrid. This is an instance of a hybrid object, something that does not exist. So this is a commercial for a mouthwash, whose power again is compared to the power of a grenade. And finally, the most difficult, the most complex and subtle way to construct a metaphor in advertising, according to Forceville's model, is that of representing only one of the metaphor terms, typically the product that they want to sell, in this case, the soap bar, Dove soap bar, and not representing the other term of the metaphor, but suggesting it using the context. So in this case, the soap bar is compared to a milk bowl, right? A bowl of milk. And the idea is that the soap bar contains all the nutrients and the hydrating properties of actual milk and so forth. But the milk is not represented. It's cued, it's suggested by the context, because we see a kitten licking on actually the soap bar. So the second term of the metaphor, which would be the soap bar, the milk bowl, is not represented, but is suggested by the context. It should also be mentioned that, especially in advertisement, it's very rare to find advertisements, metaphorical advertisements that don't have words, right? So those who write metaphors in advertisements, who produce metaphorical advertisements, typically want the consumers to converge toward the same interpretation, toward an non-ambiguous interpretation of the message of the advertisement. They want to sell the product. And so typically they do so by adding a logo, a slogan, by adding words. This is an exception, for instance. We can all probably recognize the brand that is here, the product that is advertised here. Yeah, it's the Coca-Cola. And they dare, let's say, to construct this metaphor, this metaphorical advertisement, without including words, without even showing the logo of their product. And it's actually a bold move, that suggests to the viewers, our brand so well that we don't need to show you our brand, we don't need to show you our logo. You already know us, you're already one of us. So besides this and other few examples, typically, at least in advertisement, metaphors are constructed using words and pictures together. So they are polysemiotic rather than monosemiotic. And actually, in the scientific literature, when we read about, so if you want to find studies on metaphorical images, especially in advertising, within the cognitive linguistic traditions, most of the research, where most of the research on metaphors is embedded, scholars, when define these messages that combine words and pictures, as multimodal metaphors. The problem is that they are not multimodal in the sense that the term multimodality is used in a different way compared to what psycholinguists and cognitive scientists would do. So in psycholinguistics and cognitive science, when we use the term modality or multimodality, we think of the sensory channels through which we perceive reality, like by vision, by hearing, by touching, and so forth. And if we consider that definition of modality, then you would agree that all of these, they became small, okay. That, for instance, all of these three messages, we perceive them through vision, like we see written language, we see gestures, we see still images. So from the perspective of the sensory channel involved through which we perceive these messages, we use vision. So it's monomodal, right? The point is that these three messages involve different systems of signs from the point of view of their structure, from the point of view of the semiotic systems involved. This uses words, this uses gestures, this uses pictorial signs, and so forth. So they involve different semiotic systems in the way they are constructed. But from the point of view of the processing, the point of view of the sensory channels involved, we perceive all of these three messages through one modality, which is vision. So there is always, when we talk about multimodal metaphor, there is always a bit of ambiguity depending on the type, the background of the scholar you are talking with. Because for some scholars, multimodality, it means hearing and vision, for instance, you know, audio logos and so forth. And for other scholars, multimodal metaphors are just pictures that have words and, you know, images, for instance. And I think it's important when we analyze these images, it's actually important to keep in mind that we can approach the analysis of how these images are realized by looking at their structure or by looking at their processing. So also the ambiguity of the term modality suggests that we can look at these images in two different ways. We can look at how are they constructed, and in that case, we look at their structure. We can look at the semiotic systems that are involved in their constructions, or we can look at how are they processed, how are they understood by the people who see these images. And so it should be clarified, actually, that there is a difference between structure and processing. For instance, an image like this is monomodal because we perceive it through vision. Yeah, we can see this, but we can also see this, even though it's a word, it's a written word. But it's polysemiotic of the verbo-pictorial variety. It's polysemiotic because it involves pictorial and linguistic signs. Another point, another question about these images is, what do words do within these metaphorical images? So in many cases, these metaphorical images, as we said, are polysemiotic. It means that they combine, people who produce them combine pictorial signs and linguistic signs and words. So what do the words do within the image? Typically, again, by relying on one genre on which we are focusing, because it's probably the easiest, in metaphorical advertisement, words are used to help the viewers identify the product or the brand. So again, you know, the words are used to focus the attention on what is the product, which usually is then the one of the metaphor terms. It's the target of the metaphor that is then compared to something else. But there are also other functions. So in some cases where the image, for instance, is somehow very ambiguous, probably very evocative, very artistic, and therefore also very ambiguous, words can be used to make the metaphor explicit, to make a metaphor explicit. As in this case, night is a journey. In other cases, let's see. Oh yeah. In other cases, words within the image are used to help the viewer to solve the puzzle displayed by the image. So some metaphorical images in advertising are kind of a quiz, a puzzle to solve. Yeah. So here, for instance, you have an advertisement for DVD reader, or probably DVD reader. Is that the right word? Something that you put DVD inside, and then you see the movie on the screen.
A player, maybe.
A player, DVD player. Yeah. Can any of you understand this image? It's very difficult to understand, right? It's not very clear. It looks like
a razor.
A razor, exactly. Exactly. It looks like a razor, but what does it mean? Why would they compare the DVD player to a razor?
Well, that you expect to see very sharply. Good quality pictures.
Exactly. So the slogan helps. In this case, the language, the words help to solve the puzzle. Here, the puzzle is the polysemy of the word sharp. So sharp can be, you know, as sharp as a razor, something that cuts very well, but sharp can also be the quality of an image. It means, you know, a high resolution image, extra sharp picture quality. So in this case, and in many others, words within a metaphorical images are used to convey, to help the viewers to solve the puzzle, to play with the image somehow. Let's see what time it is. I'm gonna skip this for the moment. Allora, question 5. So this would be the 3 main functions that words within metaphorical images have. Namely, make the metaphor explicit. Make the metaphor explicit, or help the viewer to interpret the metaphor somehow. I'm going to skip this for the moment because I'm afraid I will not have the time, but we can go back to that if we have time. Question 5, how are abstract concepts expressed in metaphorical images? So, the thing with metaphor is that they are usually defined in general, metaphors in language and so forth. They're usually defined as techniques that we have to explain in more concrete terms something that is very abstract. Or tools that we have to clarify abstract and obscure, difficult concepts through concrete terms. Yeah. When we produce a metaphor in an image, when we express a metaphor in an image, however, we have to represent something. We cannot represent an abstract concept in a direct way, because by definition, an abstract concept does not have a tangible reference that can be depicted, that can be visually rendered. So what do we represent within the image? And so how are abstract concepts represented in the image? In some cases, so in a recent study with a colleague, we hypothesized that metonymy would play an important role. Metonymy is a semantic relation, is considered the little sister of metaphor, is the semantic relation that aligns 2 concepts or 2 terms that belong to the same conceptual domain. For instance, when we talk about, we can refer to a person by mentioning a part of his outfit, like the red hat asked for another beer. I don't know, something like that. So metonymies are usually defined as semantic relations where that function by means of conceptual contiguity, conceptual closeness. And there is a lot of research on trying to systematically classify types of metonymies, like part for whole, cause for effect, producer for product. We can refer to authors or brands or outfit brands. I bought a Gucci. You know, you didn't buy a Gucci, you bought the product of the producer Gucci. So producer for product, action for agent, and so forth. There are different taxonomies, different ways to classify metonymies. And with a colleague, we took one of the most comprehensive lists of metonymies that have been published by Panther and Radden, and we used it as a coding scheme for manually classifying the operation involved in metaphorical advertisement. So this, for instance, is an advertisement for a software. So how do you advertise a software, which is something intangible? It's something that cannot be graphically depicted. It cannot be rendered within an image. In this image here, it's a software, actually it's an antivirus software. So it's a firewall, something that protects your system, your system. So here they display these cables that were commonly used to connect to the internet, to the Ethernet, not by Wi-Fi, but through cable. And they display these internet cables somehow as if they were barbed wire, as if they were these protecting tools that are used, to surround a protected area. So we classified all of the, we use this list of metonymies to classify the steps that would lead participants to get to the interpretation of the software that they advertise is as good as protecting internet users as barbed wire. And with a good degree of inter-rater agreement, we demonstrated that metonymies play an important role in helping metaphor producers to express intangible concepts, abstract concepts in metaphorical images, in images. Another way through which abstract concepts can be rendered, especially in another genre, which is the genre of political cartoons and illustrations in general, is through symbols. Symbols, here we have a few instances, like the $ is usually, which by conventionally it means American money, basically, can be used also to mean maybe American economy or money in general. And here is used in a metaphorical image to suggest that money makes us prisoners, or that American economy it's incarcerating, is making us prisoners, something like that. Again, here another symbol, the at of the at symbol, is used to convey the abstract concepts of technology or the internet, probably technology, and it's used within a metaphorical construction where technology is something that makes us slaves, that makes us prisoners, and so forth. The last question to address is, how do we write the content of abstract concepts using emoji? And here I'd like to also, illustrate a study that I have been conducting with a colleague from Germany, Philipp Wicke, recently. What we did here, because I'm interested in abstract concepts and abstractions, we tried to use emoji as semantic primitives somehow, and we tried to see how would people represent the meaning, the content of abstract concepts using emojis. And then we manually coded all the strategies that people would use to express abstract concepts through emojis. And we compared the strategies used to express abstract concepts and the strategies used to express concrete concepts. So emojis, as we all know, are these symbols that can be found on different devices, and they're commonly used on social media, and on different devices they have different renderings, which can, it has been suggested that the different renderings of the same emoji in different environment can be compared to different dialects. I don't know if I agree with that, but that's an interesting perspective. So the smiling, the face with tears of joy is rendered in different ways on different social media and in different systems. And these different renderings has been suggested that they can be compared with dialects found in language. So what we did with this colleague, we took a list of 300 basic level concepts. 150 of them were abstract concepts taken from a database of concrete and abstract concepts, so from previous data sets, and 150 were highly concrete concepts. And then basically we set up a crowdsourcing task online, and we asked people to translate each of these concepts into emojis. So people could use just one emoji or a sequence of emojis. And then, so we didn't give much direction on that. They were asked to represent the meaning of the concepts through emoji. And then we ran extensive statistical analysis on the productions, on the data collected. So what we did in particular, we found that, no, I'm gonna say later what we found. What we did after collecting all of the data, we also manually coded the strategies used by the participants, and we based our codings on these strategies which we observed informally in the data. So we observed that in some cases people would use literal translations from concept to emoji, as in these examples. I'm showing you here an instance of the strategy of literal representation for a concrete concept and for an abstract concept. This was very rare, very rarely found, by the way. So a literal translation would be bike, and they would simply use the emoji of the bike. For an abstract concept, like a generation, they would use a literal representation of all the age stages. So all the sequence of ages, basically. Of course, the literal strategy was very rarely found for abstract concepts. A very, very interesting strategy that some participants used to express abstract concepts, especially, but also concrete concepts, is rebus, is what we call the rebus strategy. So, for instance, look at this word. They had to represent through emojis the word carpet. Some participants represented the word carpet as a car and a pet. So they put the emoji for the car and the emoji for a pet dog. And that's how they represented the meaning of carpet, the content of carpet through emoji. For an abstract concept like career, some participants, again, they use this rebus-like strategy. So they would use a car and then an ear. And we found this extremely creative, an extremely creative way to represent concepts that we didn't actually expect to find. Another strategy that we found is the strategy based on phonetic similarity. And here the doubt remained whether it was an intentional or unintentional way of representing these concepts. For instance, people who had to represent the content of the word shelf, some participants used the emoji of the shell, because phonetically the sound shelf, it's similar to the sound of the word shell. And we don't know whether, the person who wrote this answer, who used this emoji to represent the word shelf, did it on purpose, knowing that it wasn't actually the right meaning, or not. And similarly, for an abstract concepts like patience, some participants used the emoji of a patient. So the person with the band-aid here, which can be considered to be a patient. And then another strategy is what we labeled as the figurative strategy. Sorry. The figurative strategy, which we divided into subtypes. Again, we classified the outputs, the emoji sequences, as metonymy, as in this case, so cage, and people would use the locker because usually cages have lockers, so it's a part for the whole somehow. Symbols, as the use of this, I don't know the name, to represent luck. Idiomatic expressions, so in some cases people used the representation of idiomatic expressions to represent an abstract concept. So they had, for instance, to represent the concept comparison, and they use this sequence of emoji, an apple and an orange. This suggests that they had in mind the idiomatic expressions comparing apples and oranges in English, right? Which features the word comparison, compare. And in other cases, they would use the a metaphorical sequence of emoji, like for the abstract concept of courage, they would use the physical strength, the symbol of the arm, suggesting that moral strength is metaphorically like physical strength. We label this as a metaphor. And basically, by manually annotating all of the productions by our participants, we found that, as expected, for concrete concepts, there is a stronger interpersonal agreement than for abstract concepts. So we are more coherent, more consistent in giving our outputs, in giving our representation emoji sequences when we have to represent a concrete concept than when we have to represent an abstract concept. And then we found that abstract concepts are often expressed through emojis or sequences of emojis that we labeled as metaphorical, so figurative constructions, and that abstract concepts, more than concrete concepts, were represented through linguistic strategies like the rebus or the phonological similarity strategy, which suggests that for abstract concepts, the linguistic form of the word or the content, the meaning that we derive from language is more prominent and more important than for concrete concepts. And to conclude, some work in progress. As I said, my ERC does not focus on pictures or on images. I will focus on language, but it focuses on abstraction. And as a matter of fact, also in images, there are different ways in which we can abstract, we can extract features and convey features that are important to represent a concept. And here I wanted just to end with this nice graph about what is the just right level of schematicity, of genericity that makes a good symbol, like a good pictorial sign. So thank you.
Well, thank you so very much, Marianna, for this very, very rich paper. It was really interesting to look at all the examples you have collected. I do have plenty of questions, actually, but I don't want to step in front of anybody. So do we have some time for debate, Marianna? Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Okay, perfect. So please, I invite our guests to raise their hands if they do have questions. Maybe in the meantime, I will ask you mine just to break the ice. So it occurred to me, so it might be a misunderstanding. So I might have missed something, a piece of your explanation, but it occurred to me that conceptual metaphor theory would explain very well metaphorical images as well. So you said, well, you have underlined or emphasized some differences. For example, when you said it was the second half of your presentation, you said that in images, we cannot refer to the abstract concept at all. But I mean, we don't do that in language either. I can say we can, but we don't have to. If I say I'm melting, you understand I'm very hot. If I say I'm fuming, you understand I'm very angry, right? So I think there is a good, we could find or all the images that were explicitly or more straightforwardly metaphoric that you showed us. I think all of them had quite a good explanation based on conceptual metaphor theory. And I would like to know why you don't agree, right? So tell us more about that.
Well, first of all, language has a much more direct way of expressing abstract concepts than images. That's out of doubt. We have a word for freedom, we have a word for anger, we have a word for philosophy. That's the meaning of the word. You know, it labels an abstract concept in a direct way. When we go into the semiotic system of images, we have to somehow resort to metaphors, symbols, indirect ways of representing an abstract concept, because we don't have a more direct way. So you can say, I'm fuming and I understand that you are angry, but you can also simply say, I'm angry. While in images, you have to draw someone fuming. You cannot say I'm angry in a direct way within a picture. That's what I wanted to say.
Right. No, I understand that. But what I'm saying is that the representation, so the way you represent the metaphor in images is still based on conceptual metaphor theory, or on conceptual metaphors, right? So if you show me Donald Duck who's fuming out of the ears, I mean, that's obviously a symptom of anger in real life. That's why I understand it. Yes. And it's the same as saying I'm fuming.
Yes, and that's the example. The Donald Duck fuming is a clear representation of the conceptual metaphor suggested by Lakoff and Johnson. Anger is a boiling fluid, and so forth.
Right.
In many other cases, the conceptual metaphors a la Lakoff and Johnson are much less, involved. Okay, in the graph case, yes, there is this primary metaphor quantity, like more is up, less is down, and so forth. But in other cases, I think they're much less involved. And the most important thing is that, yes, we can always, and I have been doing this for in the past years, we can always try to address or like to analyze metaphorical images by attributing to that image some conventional conceptual metaphor a la Lakoff and Johnson. More is up, less is down, bigger is important, smaller is not important. Yes, we can do that, but that does not exhaust the meaning in the image. So that explains only a little part of the image. So I have been doing this when I put together, for instance, the corpus of visual metaphors, VisMet. It's a corpus of visual metaphors. We annotated back like almost 10 years ago. We annotated each of the images in the corpus for metaphoricity on different levels. So first, we annotated the conceptual metaphors a la Lakoff and Johnson that can be associated to the images, but then also we annotated the way in which the metaphor is expressed using a different model, like Forceville's model. And then we annotated whether the metaphor uses symbols or not. So yes, I agree that trying to see a conceptual metaphor like Lakoff and Johnson within these images, it's something that can be done. It's not the only thing that can be done. That's my point. And I think that a lot of research on metaphors in images, but also on metaphors in language, in a way got stuck there. So the main goal of the research was just to focus on what conventional conceptual metaphor can be associated to linguistic or pictorial expressions, and that's it. While I think that after 40 years, now we are taking that as something true, something that we know exists, but we can also move further and look at different levels, different layers of meaning within these images. That they have to be combined and integrated, absolutely. So you're right. But it is not the only dimension of meaning on which these images can be analyzed.
Right. No, I totally agree on that. I mean, I didn't mean to suggest that that's, you know, everything you have. And once you have understood, I mean, my impression is that the basic level of cognitive access we have is based on that. Then, of course, you can play much more with, you know, with the repertoire of symbols and knowledge and cultural differences and everything. And so I agree. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Sorry.
There is a very, you know, quite recent, like 5 years ago, a paper by Zoltan Kovacs on levels of metaphor use, published in Cognitive Linguistics, I think. And basically he puts together different theoretical models of analyzing metaphors at different levels. And so he starts from image schemas, and then he takes the tradition in frame semantics, so Fillmore and so forth. He takes other traditions, other semantic models and conceptual models of meaning construction and integration. And he says basically, so we have different levels of meaning that we can use and apply to analyze metaphors. And we shouldn't just simply use, you know, just one, like conceptual metaphor theory, and that's it. So
yeah, no, I think I didn't read the paper, but I think I attended the presentation. It was an online presentation, maybe a couple of years ago. Is that much older than that, the paper? I think
2017.
Yeah, maybe. Well, it was very along those lines. I'll read the paper because this, I mean, as you can see, this is a thing that I have some doubts about, and I'm very happy I could, I mean, I had the opportunity to discuss it with you, and I'm definitely going to dig a little bit more into that.
Yes, that's fantastic. Yeah.
Anybody else in the audience would like to ask a question?
Overwhelmed. I showed too many images, maybe.
Well, another thing that occurred to me was that in the comparison between the first set of images you showed us that were much less direct, or better, like the umbrella and salad, you needed a lot of the salad umbrella or the umbrella salad. You needed a lot of you know, work, of conceptual work and creativity to understand that. But I mean, isn't that so? You said you selected those images on Pinterest. So I'm not familiar with Pinterest, but normally when we consume images, they are in context, right? So that of course helps a lot to build a narrative and to write. So
precisely. And so my point there was precisely that. So that just by looking at, I started by saying that the definition of visual metaphors is that there has to be some incongruity, something that looks strange. Is that incongruity enough to say?
No, it's not. Yeah, I think you're right. Absolutely.
Exactly. If we don't have a context, if we can't grasp information, like if we can't infer the communicative goal of the person who produced the message, like what do you want to tell me? Do you want to persuade me to buy something? Do you want to entertain me? If it's difficult to understand the communicative goal and to construct a message, a pragmatic meaning, then these images end there in a way. They're just, we say like, that's nice. It's a nice Photoshop. It's based on visual similarity, with the shape is similar. But then it's difficult to construct a metaphor, even though by instinct, our brains, that's what we tend to do. We try to find more meaning. We try to make sense of things, of what we see. But in those images, so we might try to find meaning, but then we are lost somehow, precisely because there is no context, there is no. Right. So that's why I would say those images they are potentially metaphor, and they become actual metaphor when they are embedded in a context that can help us, guiding us toward an interpretation at least.
All right. Great. Just the very last minutes to ask Marianna a question. Well, that was really great, Marianna. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, this is just the beginning. I really hope I'll meet you in person very soon. So I'll get in touch as soon as I'm back on Sunday in Bologna. So I'll definitely be in touch. And well, I'll see you all on the 3rd of June for our next seminar. Thanks again, Marianna, and have a lovely weekend, you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Marianna.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.